Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined, where we explore the diverse and sometimes unexpected paths of veterinary professionals. Today, we have a guest who embodies the spirit of reimagining vet life in unexpected ways. Our guest today is Dr. Sarah Boston, a veterinary surgical oncologist who is trading some of the operating room time for the spotlight of stand-up comedy and is enjoying embracing all facets of herself. She has spent much of her veterinary career in academic settings as she loves teaching. She also co-founded a veterinary satire news website called The Cage Liner and is a podcaster of the Co-Medicine podcast, where she interviews other medical professionals who have entered into comedy in some way. While Sarah is a comedian, this episode shares a lot of life challenges that are not kicks and giggles, including when she really started to lean into her creative side by writing about her experiences, diagnosing her own thyroid cancer, and her journey through it. Her story is presented in her natural, humorous way in a best-selling memoir called Lucky Dog: How Being a Veterinarian Saved My Life. We still discuss the importance of humor along with a lot of different topics that I think you will appreciate. So let's get to the conversation with the highly talented Dr. Sarah Boston. When did you know that you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
Okay, so I'm probably like a lot of our colleagues. I'm the 6-year-old girl who was like, I'm going to be a veterinarian. Yeah. So that was probably the earliest I remember, but I was just like immersed in animals and loving animals like as long as I can remember. So I think as soon as I realized that was a job, that's when I decided that's, what I was going to do.
Now, did your parents have anything to do with animals, or was this completely different?
Not as a career, just in that mostly my mom is pretty crazy for dogs and cats and like always animals around, and she's very close to her animals and they're very important to her, but not anything more than that. Just having animals around me at all times, but not like that they were working with animals at all.
Gotcha. So when it was time to be getting into vet school, did you have an idea of what your career in veterinary medicine would look like, and did that change throughout vet school?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I always think, because things were different back then. Like I graduated a long time ago, and like from about 10 years old, and I lived in a small town. I don't think this would ever happen now, but like I would go and watch at a vet clinic. I would sit and observe, and then I started like cleaning, and then I started doing little jobs and like basically worked in this vet clinic until my family moved when I was about 13. So I was very close to the veterinarian there. And then there was another clinic I started volunteering at. Those were primary care practices. And I think by the time I got into vet school, I was kind of like, okay, I kind of know what that is. And it wasn't that I was bored with it, but I was just like, what else is there? Then I had a phase. I had my exotics phase. I feel so cliche. I had my exotics phase that I was going to be a zoo vet or I was going to be a wildlife vet. And then I was like, I don't think I even knew. I was young in vet school. So I graduated. I just turned 23 when I graduated. So like I was very young and very like, oh, I'm going to move to Africa and work at Kruger National Park, that seems like definitely going to happen for me. So I kind of went through that phase, and then I worked in the hospital in the summer of my second and third year, and I sort of got exposed to surgery. And then I think trailing off like third and fourth year of vet school, I was like, no, I think I want to do surgery. So that's where I landed, but I did have some diversions in there.
Yeah. The fact that you were able to shadow and work when you were 10 to 13 is actually really great. And with surgery, though, and I also wanted to comment, you said it's been a while for vet school for you. And that's actually one thing that I've heard you mention, is that the generation that you were in is very different than now. How do you explain like going through vet school and kind of the mentation and expectations and all of those things that you notice is very, very different than today?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding like an old fart, which I will say my favorite generation, just in general, not just veterinary, is the millennials. I'm not a millennial. I love millennials because I think they're very reasonable. And you see the pendulum has swung, right? And now, like, I think the millennials they're the ones we should be listening to. So that, just to start with saying that, I think, again, I hate being like an old fuddy-duddy and being like, back when I was a vet, but wellness wasn't a thing. There was no communication classes. There was very much the attitude of, you suck it up, you chose this life. Yeah. And I did it, right? I did a surgery residency too. I did an internship in a surgery residency, so that I was immersed in that culture. I don't think that was good. I think some things were good, like taking responsibility for your patients, taking responsibility for everything you do, working hard. Like those are very positive things, but never taking a break, never getting a weekend off. And the suggestion that too bad, like you chose to do this, that's the way it is. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think anyone should work like that. There is a feeling of maybe like, again, this will make me unpopular, like has it swung too far? I don't know the answer to that. I think we're in a helping profession. We need to be there for our patients within reason, right? That's the thing. And we also need to have colleagues that we can share the load with so that we can pass things back and forth. Someone has to take care of these patients, and they are dogs. They don't care that it's Christmas or the weekend or when they get sick. People need help when they need help. So we need a system that we can support each other and support our patients. So yeah, I mean, I think the positive things that have kind of come through now is there is at least an effort to teach us about communication skills and wellness and taking care of ourselves, and that is that it's a thing, and B, that it should be a priority, because, the old adage that we're not good veterinarians if we're not well ourselves. And so, yeah, I wouldn't want to go back to the way I was trained, I guess I would say.
And I have to mention, I am a part of the millennial generation, so thank you.
Okay. My favorite.
I'm in the middle, I guess.
Yeah, my fave.
Yeah. But yeah, and I don't know why, but I always think of like surgery or surgeons as kind of being a very serious specialty, which you do have life, death in your hands. You're cutting into something. So I can see where there's some need to be serious. At the same time, it seems like a very different culture, even within specialties sometimes. And I don't know if you were able to kind of see cross-functionally if there were differences among like specialists or specialty.
In the surgeons? Yeah, I mean, I think there is. I think surgery, even still it's still kind of male dominated. So I think there's a bit of like that colors our profession.
Mm-hmm.
I don't always think positively. It's coming. There's more and more female surgeons, and it's a numbers game, right? I mean, look at the vet school classes. Like, you have to be pretty intentional about not training female surgeons with what the crop of interns and people that are applying comes out. So I think, over the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to see it's going to even out and probably go the other way. Like a lot of the other specialties and primary care veterinarians, it's more female dominated, but it's still pretty male dominated. There's a lot of implications of that, I think. That's changing too, I guess. But as we see the genders change, where, the culture changes too. So, but yeah, I mean, I think surgery it is a pretty serious discipline, but it's not that nutrition's not serious. I mean, you still need to know a lot of things I don't know. And maybe it's not as like critical timing wise. I think that's probably the thing with surgery is like, you have to make decisions for better, for worse. You need to make a decision in surgery, and that's what's happening. So whereas other specialties, you might have a little bit more time to consider things and think about things. So maybe less time pressure, but I don't know. Depends what you're doing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I want to talk about surgery too, because surgery it's getting even more of a broad term, I think, as we're niching down even among specialties. And because I saw that you were a founding fellow of surgical oncology and oral and maxillofacial surgery. That's a mouthful. So that sounds pretty cool. How did you fall into going from, I want to be a surgeon, to getting more specific?
Yeah. So the founding fellow designation with the ACVS is basically the ACVS has started having more specialization and recognition for board certified ACVS surgeons who are in a subspecialty. So it's kind of been developing, I would say, over the last 15 years or so. And now there's minimally invasive and orthopedic and oral maxillofacial surgery. And I'm going to forget one, and surgical oncology. But surgical oncology, because it was kind of the first one. So I would say it was kind of a model within the ACVS for like, how are we going to do this? How do we assign someone that designation? And you can always say going forward, you have to do a fellowship. And that's how you do an ACVS fellowship, and then you get the ACVS designation. So anyone who's not designated like a founding fellow, that means that they're doing an ACVS approved fellowship. But then what do you do with people like me? I did a fellowship in surgical oncology at the Colorado State University in 2005. So I'm not going to do another fellowship. So it was just kind of the founding fellow designation is sort of a way that the ACVS would recognize people who've done mostly fellowships, in that field, have published in that field. And then the oral maxillofacial surgery one is similar. Like now there is a fellowship, but up until then, they just kind of looked at people working in the field who published in the field, spoke in the field, and have done, training in that area. So that's how those two designations came about.
Interesting. So how did you discover that you really liked doing surgical oncology specifically?
Yeah, so it was one of my mentors I think he's fully retired. His name's Dave Centurmi. So when I was in primary care, I was still interested in becoming a surgeon. I didn't get a surgery residency right away. I was trying to work towards that. So again, I don't know, it's just maybe just what I always did since I was young. I volunteer with him, scrub in with him just to get experience. And he had done the fellowship at Colorado State University. So I think that it really was partly being exposed to it, which I think is really important. I think that's why mentorship's so important, is just being exposed to an area and being like, oh, that's actually something I really like. And then I think I like the discipline because I've always had a bit of a creative side, and there is some creativity to surgical oncology that I think isn't within some of the other, I'm going to get in trouble. Should I just make everyone mad at this podcast? But
Go for it.
I shouldn't do that because there's creativity. There's a type of creativity that, because tumors can be anywhere, and sometimes you have to think through problems, and sometimes you have to think through things differently. And actually, now that I'm saying that, I'm going to upset someone, but definitely some very creative orthopods and creative soft tissue surgeons that you're really trying to think through problems. But something about it, trying to reconstruct a wound, trying to figure out, does this dog need surgery or not? Like that just resonated with me, that it was kind of fun to do. And I think at the same time, I think all of my resident mates going through, they did not like it. So when cases were getting shared around, they're like, I'd be like, I'll take that, and they didn't really want to do those cases. And it's, we all shared them. But as far as I would be happy to do those kind of cases. So, and at a time, like when I did my residency, surg-onc wasn't so much of a thing. And so I think even my faculty weren't so excited about it. So they were like, okay, you go do that, go have fun with that. So I think that's where I really decided that that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then I was able to do the fellowship at Colorado State University.
That can be a good sign that you are enjoying the things that nobody else wants to do. That's a great way to find a good business and niche.
Yeah.
And I understand what you're saying, though. You were finding that these types of cases required a little more constant creativity versus I do believe that the veterinary industry itself does require us to be very agile and creative in general. But yeah, I can see where each case is so different and so unique that you have to have a completely different strategy every time you go in. So you mentioned a creative side, and there are definitely a lot of things throughout your career, including lots of things you're currently doing that have a lot of creativity. So when did you start to really understand that creative part of you and start looking at different outlets potentially to express those?
I don't even know if I can say when I first started to feel that. I think, I've been actually thinking about this a lot, think about your family history. And my parents are creatives, but it was very that was what they did. It was kind of a hobby. It was their passion, but not. I don't know. They're just of that generation, right? Where it was it was very drilled into me, you have a job, it's a vocation. I don't know how many times my father said vocational ticket, and he was so happy I want to be a veterinarian because he's like, you can work anywhere. It's your vocational ticket. You have to have that. And it's so, I think it's good, but maybe a little too much. I think that might have been drilled into my head just a little too much, and I think economic times were different then, growing up during the recession in the 80s, just things my parents would say to me. And anyway, I'm happy being a veterinarian, but I think the creative side of me was kind of that is my parents write plays. They were in plays. My dad was a poet. My dad is a writer, but he was a teacher. He was a principal. My mom was a teacher, because those were jobs, right? And writing's not a job, and being in a play is not a job. So always had that, was always exposed to it, was always exposed to the arts, but it wasn't really a thing you would do, which I don't know if it would have been different for me if I had, I think I still had that animal side and my science side and my nerdy side. So I don't know if it would have turned out differently, but definitely it was always something that was just, that's nice. You can do that. Always loved lecturing, trying to be creative in my lectures, trying to have jokes in my lectures. But I think when I really started exploring that side of myself more was when I had thyroid cancer and ended up writing about it, ended up kind of serendipitously being able to publish a book. And then I was like, oh, I like comedy writing. I like writing. I like that side of myself. I like whatever that is. So I think that's when I really kind of sparked me to explore that more. And it was kind of a combination of I discovered I like that. And also, oh, I could get cancer and die. Like, what am I doing? What do I want to do? How do I want to use my time? It's just that realization, not to be morbid, but we're all going to die, right? And we only have a certain amount of time here to work or do whatever you're doing. And so thinking about that, and not in a morbid way, but in a way of like, okay, how do you want to spend your time here? Because even if you live to be 100, that's only 100 years. So, and you're probably not working that whole time. So what are you going to do with your time? So I think that, like, just in a nutshell, is kind of why I started going down that road. And it not as a morbid thing, as a joyful thing, just trying to be like, okay, I want to do other things as well. I still love being a surgeon, but I want to do more than one thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I'd like to go back and dive into that a little bit deeper, because for a very long time, you went into academia to teach and work there in that setting. And then I knew what time the book was published. I didn't know exactly what time you were diagnosed. So you deal with surgical oncology in animals. So it was kind of interesting that you were able to wonder if a mass near your thyroid was going to be cancerous. And I also read that you borrowed your husband's mobile ultrasound machine.
Yes.
So he's a vet too. Did you meet in vet school or?
We met, this is going to sound like scandalous. It's really not, though. I was a fourth year student. No, he was a fourth year student and I was an intern. So I graduated from University of Saskatchewan. He graduated from OBC. I was an intern, and that's where we met. Yeah. It ceases to be, it's a long time ago. It's not that scandalous anymore, but yeah, I still don't think faculty should date students. Just want to go on the record saying that. That is very bad, but interns and fourth years, meh. Anyway, that's my stance. That's my stance on that. He did have a brand new ultrasound. He's a large animal vet. It was brand new. I like to tell people that, especially vets, because we know where large animal ultrasound machines go. He likes to do a lot of video. So yeah, but it was brand new probe, brand new machine. And I was like, well, in the reason I did that, because we were just talking about Canada and America. I'm in Canada. I'm happy in Canada. Our healthcare system is great. It's socialized. It's so slow. And especially if you have anything to do with your thyroid, because it's often not cancer. And if it is thyroid cancer, it's a slow moving cancer. It's good cancer, as they like to tell you, which no one who's experienced that will ever think that's helpful to be told their cancer is good. I was like, I couldn't get an ultrasound. And like, I've seen so many ultrasounds of dogs with thyroid cancer. I was like, well, I just want to look. Because I also was like, well, it's probably a cyst and I'm freaking out. And I'm just going to like look and I'll be like, oh, okay, it's a cyst. Okay, I'll just wait it out and get my ultrasound. But then when I did look at it, it did very much look like a thyroid carcinoma to me, as far as what I had seen. But I mean, I'd seen hundreds literally of dogs getting because I'd go down and watch their ultrasound. So hundreds of dogs, thyroid carcinomas, and they look kind of the same. So I was like, yeah, that's exactly what that looks like. So yeah, that's how that came to pass. Again, probably not a good idea for veterinarians to do that. Ultrasound yourself. A lot of women do that when they're pregnant. I'm like, don't do that. It's not good. But yeah, I just kind of was like, I just want to look and see, measure it, check it out. So yeah, I did do that.
That helped escalate the process at all, that you said, I'm a veterinary surgical oncologist and this looks cancerous?
I went back to my doctor and said that. And I actually it was hilarious. I brought the USB key because I saved all the images. And I was like, I went back. I mean, I was getting borderline hysterical at this point, right? Because he was like, good doctor, but he's like, oh, it'll be fine, Sarah, don't worry. Like, so many thyroid nodules in women, so many, like, so many things that are benign. And so he was like, don't worry, like, it's fine. And that was very challenging for me because I had 4 doctors in succession say, it's not cancer, it's not cancer. And I was like, no, I know this is new. So on top of worrying about it, you feel crazy and you're kind of being treated like that and things are moving slowly. So that was good time creatively for me, but not a good time personally, I guess I would say. So I went back to the doctor. I had my USB key and I was like crying, like, ah. And then I was like, do you want to see the images? And he was like, no, like, what? Which also, like, primary care doctors don't look at ultrasounds like veterinarians.
Yeah, they would know.
So
you probably know more than they do.
Yeah, I think he was like, A, you're acting wild, and B, like, no, I don't want to, like, why would I want to see that? So yeah, that's kind of how that evolved. So yeah, but then of course at the same time I'm writing about it. I'm like, this is absurd. which it was. So yeah, I would say it was creatively good to be like in the slow healthcare system, but personally challenging.
Yeah. So were you writing this memoir as you were going through it, or were you
Yeah.
more
I'm
reflective?
no, it was as like, and I didn't know I was writing a memoir, to be honest. I was just kind of writing. Like it was just this creative outlet, and I was just frustrated and the absurdity of it and the frustration of it. So I was just writing. I thought, oh, maybe I could help someone else with thyroid cancer. Maybe it'll be a blog. Blogs were big then. I didn't really know what it was going to be. I was kind of writing. I was sending it to my friends, and so they knew what was going on because I could just send out an email to everyone at the same time. But there's always been humor interspersed in what I do, how I communicate, whether it's teaching students or lecturing, or humor has always been a part of me. And so it's part of how I communicate, especially if I'm mad or frustrated, or, it's kind of how I deal with those things.
Yes, and some of the comments about the book is that it is written and there's humor in it, and there's more lightheartedness even around a very serious, scary situation. So you said that this was something always in your nature, that you've kind of been able to have some humor in life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've definitely cultivated that a lot more in recent years, and like since this, I would say the spark of me being pushed into, I want to be more creative. I want to have more humor. I want to have that be more what I'm doing. But yeah, it's always been a part of my nature. Like my best friends from high school and university, like if I was traveling, it was back in the day where you'd send postcards and letters to your friends, not emails. And they, like one of my best friends, she's in Vancouver, she's kept them all. She's like, they're so funny. Because it's just me like railing against whatever, or I have a crush on some boy, or whatever. And I actually, because I'm moving right now, I just found a diary. I had to pack it because I was rushing to pack, but I found a diary from when I went to France when I was 15 years old. My parents sent me to France to learn French, and it's so funny. Like I'm like, oh, I I packed it in the box, but I was like, I'll see you soon, and there will be some jokes that I'll make from this because it's so funny. So maybe funny because I'm 15 and I'm just laughing at myself, but also even then I was like trying to make jokes about the guy I was boarding with and like all the kind of crazy things that were happening at the time of me being a 15-year-old sent to France by myself. So,
Well, I think that's a wonderful personality trait. And we were talking about you were growing up in a town where it's kind of like a suck it up, do it. And the fact that you can bring humor along with that as well, I think is really important into not only like surviving, but actually enjoying what you're doing. And so, and I'm sure all of your students appreciate it going
I hope
through
so.
and,
I hope so.
and being able to have some humor in lectures and understand that there should be an element of fun in life, no matter what you decide to do. And especially if you want to engage in something more creative, like you are able to kind of spark that with writing. It sounds like you've done a lot of writing even when you were younger, keeping diaries and things like that. So that's very exciting. I have to follow so I can hear some 15-year-old Sarah and different jokes. So even though you've had this kind of characteristic trait of bringing humor into things, when did you get to the point where it's like, maybe I should be a stand-up comic? Because there's a difference between.
Well, what's interesting? When I was at the University of Florida, it hadn't occurred to me to be, honestly, people won't believe me, but it had not occurred to me to be a stand-up comedian. And when I was a faculty member there, the graduating class for 2 years in a row had me as their MC for their grad banquet. And I was really honored to do that. I really enjoyed teaching there and really, still in touch with some of my students from there. But after, the dean and like the head of communications, they were like, Sarah, you should be a comedian. You're so funny. And watching the dean, he was like, I could tell he was conflicted because he was enjoying that I was entertaining everyone, but all the parents were there too. So he was like also scared I was going to cross the line.
Offend
I guess
parent.
I'll just say, do something. Like you could tell he was like smiling, but kind of like, okay, like
Bracing.
smiling, embracing himself. Yeah, I don't think I did anything bad, but even when I'm doing corporate stuff now for stand-up, I'm always like, I know I got myself in a little bit of trouble with Hills, but love you, Hills. sorry, love you. Yeah, I'll try to do better. But anyway, it's just they said that to me and I was like, oh, and at the time I was taking like online more comedy writing classes, and then I moved back to Canada and started taking like improv classes. I didn't even know stand-up was a class. Like I didn't know But then at Second City, they had that. And then a lot of people who do stand up will say this, like, whether it's a class or an open mic or whatever, once you do it, like there's something about it that you kind of get hooked. And it's probably just the endorphins of making people laugh and realizing that's kind of a cool art form. That's kind of what happened for me. I was like, oh, this is what I like. It kind of brings in a lot of things I like to do. And it's also, within the arts, it's something a busy person can do, because I would love to be in a play. I would love to be in an improv group, but my schedule is such that if I do that, I will let people down. I was brushing up on my improv, so I joined an improv group here, and we did I think it was a 10-week class together. And at the end of the last class, it was our show. And the classes were on Tuesday nights, and I didn't work on Tuesdays, so I could always make my classes, but the show ended up being on a Friday. I work on Fridays, and I missed it. I told them, but that's disappointing, right? And so I was sad I wasn't there. I really connected with these people. And then they were sad I wasn't, because you're letting down the group. It's an improv group. You're supposed to learn to work together. And so stand up is like me and a microphone, and I can practice on my own and write on my own. And so it's not so much that I love being solitary, but it's also, it's a thing I can do I'm still working on it, but trying to find the balance between veterinary medicine and stand up. It does work a bit better for me to do something that's a little bit more on my own time.
Yeah. I like watching improv groups. There was an offsite. I was like a third party person at this offsite, but they brought in an improv group as kind of the entertainment for the evening. And it was very clean. It was just hilarious because it's just like, they're just being silly and having fun. And I think that's part of it too, is when you can tell someone is having fun at the same time. It's just that genuine fun that you can all kind of join. And so that is a really unique thing on improv. And I've heard you talk with several other doctor/comedians on your podcast about how that sometimes that improv aspect can actually help you in the veterinary side of things too. A lot of what you do can be very separate. And I want to ask you about that too, how you approach the stand-up side of Sarah and the veterinary side of Sarah. But as you were embracing more of the creative and the comedy side, how did that impact the veterinary part of your job?
Yeah, so improv is great for everyone, but I do think there's a big role in our profession because it teaches you to listen, it teaches you to roll with things. I found, especially during the pandemic, veterinarians are very binary. And I mean that not in a gender way. I mean that in the sense of like how we approach problems. And it's not good. Because medicine's not binary. It's not right. I guess sometimes it is right or wrong, but sometimes maybe in medicine it can be right and wrong, but sometimes how we approach a problem, like we can't let people into the building, they're in the parking lot. It can't just be so binary. We've got to look to technology. We've got to look to what are some other solutions, things we've never done before. It can't just be, we always did it this way. It just can't. We have to move forward and find solutions. And I think opening your mind to improv will help you. Opening your mind to being creative will help you with that. Because I found during the pandemic, I was the only person in my practice, and it was a big hospital, who was using telemedicine. Everyone else is just well, it's just how we do it. And to me, it was wild because I embrace all technology. Right now, I'm all about AI for my records. I'm help me. How can technology help me make this better, faster, more efficient? I'm bring it on. I'll any new thing like that, I love. So I think but that's a mindset, right? It can't just be, we always just did it that way. I'm well, maybe we did, but now there's a global pandemic. So maybe we need to do it differently. I don't know. So yeah, I think improv will help you with that. It will help you with a creative mindset. It will help you with communicating with your coworkers and listening to them, and also not shutting people down, as improv is very big on that. They talk about yes and, that's very classical for improv, but there's also yes but, and that's also shutting someone down. So if you have someone come to you at work and make a suggestion and you say, yes, that's a good idea, but here's why it's not and why we won't be doing that. You're still, even though you didn't say no, you are shutting that person down. And it's not to say we have to take everyone's ideas and implement them, but we have to listen to everyone. We do have to do that. And we have to be how can we build on what this person is saying, and can we make it better? That's what improv is. So yeah, I would encourage every veterinarian to just take a community improv class, even though you're never going to do improv. Being a veterinarian, we are kind of acting or improvising, right? Here's a client and they have their own characteristics and their own goals and their own personality traits, which, as we know, can sometimes be very interesting. I'll just say that. And then we have a dog who has its own personality traits, and they bring something to the scene and they have a problem that you need to solve, right? And really everyone wants to solve that problem. That's kind of if you think about it as a whole improv scene, like, here's the problem. We need to solve it. We have some obstacles perhaps to do with this person and whatever's going on with them. How can we listen to them? How can we get everyone on the same page and figure out how to solve this problem? So yeah, I mean, I think it kind of is improv, like in a weird way. Being a veterinarian is you're improvising. And Matt Asciuto was on my podcast, and he's like an ER vet, and he's a locum ER vet, or at least he was at the time. And I was like, that is like the ultimate improv. And he's an improv performer, because I'm like, you don't know where you're working, who's coming. Like, ER is like total improv, right? Like, at least if you're a clinical veterinarian and not an ER doctor, like, you can look at what's coming in the next day and have some idea of what to do. But ER is just like, don't know how busy you're going to be, don't know what cases you're going to see, don't know what the people are going to be like coming through the door. And if you're a locum ER doc, don't even know who you're working with. Like, that's amazing. So yeah, improv is important to help us in our jobs, help us. And then in the back, helping us listen to your technician, listen to your reception staff, listen to your coworkers, and try to work together. We have to, right? We have to work together.
I agree. So there's like the medical aspect that still requires some element of creativity. And we're in a fast moving world too. You never know what another option might be out there to help you as a tool to help this pet. But then also on the human side of things, the other end of the leash, they have thoughts and opinions and situations, whether it's financial or ethical or whatnot. Let's bring it all together to make the solution. That is creativity. That is listening, all those skills. So I think it's pretty exciting to find different ways to help us refine these skills. And then not only the skills, but the mindset as well, like you were saying. And just because this is something I'm very passionate about, this yes and kind of philosophy in life, I think is really healthy, because as human beings ourselves, if we just look at ourselves, we're very complex. We have different interests. And so I'm kind of trying to encourage this yes and mindset when it comes to us and our careers as well, and the things that we do and enjoy. So again, coming back to you are a surgical oncologist. You also are doing a lot of stand-up. You are talking about staying busy. And I'm like, oh, have you been talking at a conference? You're like, no, I've been doing stand-up. It's like, So how do you make them kind of work to be Sarah's world? Because your podcast, you interview human health as well as veterinary health professionals who also do some type of comedy. And some people feel very strongly about keeping them very separate. It's like, when I'm a doctor, I'm a doctor. When I'm a stand-up, I'm a stand-up. I do not like to make those things cross. And you do a lot of comedy in veterinary world too. So some of these things definitely have to cross. So how have you approached that? Has that evolved over time? What are your thoughts about mixing?
Yeah, when I first started doing stand-up, I wanted to be separate. I don't want clients to know. I didn't really talk about being a veterinarian on stage. I was just like middle-aged lady doing stand-up. That was like my thing. And I kind of liked that, because I was like, I have this whole thing that's nothing to do with being a vet. However, if you've wanted to be a vet since you're 6 and you're trying to be an authentic comedian and talk about who you are, like, how do you not talk about animals and that you're a vet and that perspective? Like, it's such a strong point of view that it's really hard. So it's not to say that I talk about being a vet every time I get on stage, because I don't, but they'll say I'm a vet. Yeah. So, I mean, I think about things that make me laugh are about animals or science or whatever, and so it is really hard to kind of tease those out, even when I'm just doing stand up. And then I really think that like improv and comedy, despite being, or maybe because of where it went, the timing of when I came through, I'm like, veterinary students need to know about this, and veterinarians need to know about this, and know, like, yeah, it's okay. Like, you can find your creative side. You can have another side to you. You can laugh at work. Now, I will say, like, because I'm a surgeon, like, I do have those really, like, there's things I don't let slide at work. Like, I'm very picky. I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but I'll walk around going, I'm being a picky bitch today, because I like sterility, how clean the OR is. The staff where I am do an amazing job, but like, that stuff, no. Like it has to be, things have to be a certain way when you're doing medicine, when you're doing surgery. So there's things I'm super serious about at work, even like what people wear in the OR, which, like in a private practice setting can be a little more slack than an academic setting, but not with me. No, this is how we dress in the OR. This is what, this is where you eat. This is where you don't eat. So those things I am strangely strict about, I guess I would say. But then if I have an interaction that's funny for whatever reason, it's not that I'm laughing at clients. I don't want people to think that, but sometimes it's just trying to think of the most recent example, but sometimes it's just funny. Like I had a client who was a physician and she was just insisting that like she a little bit playing the like, I'm a doctor, I'm going to tell you what to do, and I was kind of like, no, that's not what we're doing. So she was like, I don't know, she insisted that the last doctor that did a rectal exam on her dog, then the dog got bloody diarrhea, so I had to give her a script for metronidazole. And I was just like, so again, it's kind of like, okay, this is what's her problem? She's worried her dog's going to get diarrhea. And she has decided how that's going to go. So I think in that sense, I was like, okay, yes, you're concerned about that. And we don't usually do that anymore in dogs. Like we don't automatically put them on that. Here is a probiotic for a month. Your dog's probably stressed. That's what we're going to do, right? And so she was happy with that, but then she called back again. And then she was like insisting again, why isn't Dr. Boston putting my dog on antibiotics? So we had to kind of go through it again. I mean, the whole thing to me was hilarious. Like, I did find it hilarious. She was maybe being a little bit annoying, but you have to like look at it a bit from her perspective. She's stressed. She loves her dog. She doesn't want to be dealing with that. So I was just like, okay, let's go over it again. No, we're not doing antibiotics. Here's your probiotics. And in the end, I think she just didn't know much about probiotics, honestly. And I think, it was fine. But was I laughing about it in the back? Because the thing that made us laugh really hard is that she said, well, when I rectal patients, I put them on antibiotics. And I'm like, is that a thing? And then we were just thinking that was really funny. Again, not laughing at her, but, that's going to sound like I was, but just finding that funny that a doctor would say that. But then, no, like we're going to take care of her dog and we're going to do what's right for the dog and make sure that her concern is addressed. And I said, if your dog has bloody diarrhea, even on the probiotics, like we will address it again. We'll talk about it again if this is what your dog needs. And also explaining it to her. I don't know, you probably know more about this than me, but you can really mess up their microbiome, by just willy-nilly putting them on antibiotics. So we don't do that anymore. And trying to explain that to her in a way that especially she could understand.
Yes, I've actually snapped at a human ER doctor, an urgent care doctor, because she wanted to put me on antibiotics, then there was no evidence whatsoever for it. And I was actually dating my now husband at the time, and it was the first time he'd ever seen me get a little feisty. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm really passionate about this. Yes, please don't just hand out metronidazole like candy. It's really not good. So thank you.
I try. Even as a surgeon, I try.
There are definitely times of like, this is serious. This is, health and safety of our patients. There's still opportunity for humor in life. And it actually made me think of how a lot of surgeons, they'll play music or something during surgery. And maybe that's an opportunity to also let a different side out. I don't know. Do you listen? What do you listen to?
It's really funny that you say that because I love that because that's a different perspective because I don't actually. And I actually did
surgeon?
one of my, she's now a boarded surgeon, but she was a student at the time at UF. She did some work with me because I was obsessed with this for a while about noisy ORs because there's conflicting evidence, I will say that. And they look at what kind of music is good. And I think more relaxing music actually, like there's some benefits to that. However, the problem with the music in the ORs is like it just elevates the noise levels because now anesthesia has to turn up their Doppler and they have to turn up all their stuff and everyone's talking louder. And the other issue is when you're wearing a mask, it's harder to hear someone because we all do lip read to some extent. So if everyone's masked in the OR and now you can't hear me. And then the other issue is like some people just give up because you're like, what? And you can't hear them. So there's less communication in the OR about things that are important. And we measured noise levels with a decibel meter, and the noise levels were like a vacuum cleaner with music.
Oh, wow.
It's that loud. But there'll be surgeons who totally disagree. I think it is, to me, it's about the team and what makes the team work. I don't think it should be a surgeon coming in and rocking out, like just... And again, that's kind of a male thing. Yeah, it's kind of it's often a male thing. It's not always, but it's a little bit gendered in my experience of observing that. It's just like, they're just going to rock out and they're just like, I'm awesome. And I don't love that. If the whole team is like, we like listening to this and it helps relax everybody, I think that's fine. If it's just making noise and the anesthesiologist can't hear what they're doing properly, or you can't hear your team or your team can't hear you, then I don't think it's great. And there's some research looking at that as well, as like how we communicate with each other in the OR. So see, there's my serious side. See, I can be a real party pooper sometimes, I promise. I can just be a total stick in the mud. No fun at all. But yeah, my husband says this about me. I'm very dichotomous about these things have to be this way, and then I can have fun too. So yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes we have to be in an element of our comfort zone to be able to have fun. And
yeah.
And when I say comfort zone, I mean, like, you can't be at a level of stress, because then your body is in a survival mode, not in a humor mode. So if you aren't serious about some of those things, like, you can't have fun. And actually, it's really, I'm kind of glad I brought this up. I did not expect to go down music and OR. But I mean, I have talked to people who look at fear-free and how fear-free can also help the team. So one of those is, like, if you have barking dogs, the decibels go up. So your threshold of stress is just moved, right? Same thing with music. A lot of people, if you are doing an overnight shift or something, and some people like music and some people don't, you really have to work together to figure out how that works, because that music can actually escalate the stress level of your team. And so I think that is important. And actually, this is an interesting way to transition to something I want to ask you, because when we are at a certain level of stress, it's really hard to have fun, because our body is like, no, you're in survival mode. You need your fundamentals, no comedy, right? And so I happen to know, while I love that you have had that characteristic of bringing in some humor into life, it doesn't mean that life is always hunky-dory. And there have been times in your life where, I mean, you talked about getting cancer, but other things, even in a career aspect of things, that have not always gone hunky-dory. And so how have you experienced those things? Because I think that's helpful to be relatable to other people. Because I think even if we think we have the ideal job, there's always going to be something that comes up that is going to be challenging that we need to overcome. How have you, if you don't mind providing an example of maybe what were some of your big challenges in your career journey, but how did you handle those? And did humor at all help you through those?
Yeah. Okay. That's a big question.
It is a big question.
Yeah. And I think that, I'll just sort of couch that by saying, like, people say, oh, you moved around a lot, which is like one of my Achilles heels, or it feels like a weak spot for me. And I haven't. I have been in my jobs for like 5 years. And if after 5 years, I feel like, I don't know if I'm happy here, I will move on. But it doesn't stop people from making little comments about, like, oh, I just had a client say, that same client I was talking about, she said to my tech, oh, she's moving. It's like, I was like, who are you to say that about me? But I have not had the career where I worked at the same place for 25 years. Like, I acknowledge that. And I've been tenured at 2 universities and left tenured jobs, which, people, including my mother, think that's insane. If I look back and think about, pensions and, all those things. But ultimately, I just, for whatever reason in my life, decided I wanted to try something different or move on. I think my challenges are different depending where I've been. So in academia, I still love academia. I love teaching. I love being around students. I love mentoring. I love doing research. I miss those things a lot. But some of the politics and the machine, and also some of the personalities, and maybe it's my personality, I don't know. Like, some people work with me and be like, you're the problem. I don't know. Maybe I am. But I have definitely struggled with that. I think it's hard to give it like exact examples, but I think it's kind of that whole, in academia, the fights are fierce because the stakes are so low. The sort of adage of this competitive nature that's created in academia, which it doesn't even make sense. And I think that's probably less and less now, because no one wants to be there. Like, it's so sad. I mean, our teaching hospitals are getting decimated. It's partly the finances of, like, working in academia versus working in private practice. It's so different now. And also, there's just a lot of kind of toil or things that are like heavy. And then The problem is you get less and less faculty. So that load, like there's still 100 veterinary students that need to be taught. There's labs, there's lectures, there's on-call, there's teaching residents, there's having graduate programs. Now you have 2 people doing what 5 used to do. How are they supposed to do that, right? So, and then how do you attract people? And you usually are going to attract residents. So these residents are coming through and they're like, no, thank you. How do we attract them to stay in academia? That's a total tangent. We're talking about me. Back to me. My current struggle in private practice, I think, has been more to do with support and the way we pay specialists. And then, so we pay a percentage of what you bring in, and then you don't have enough support. And then the system is, I have found a lot of challenges with that, I think. Yeah. I think that's been, I'm trying to think of my biggest challenge, is just feeling frustrated that I don't have the support, the technicians that I need, but then yet the way I'm getting paid, essentially, we get paid a percentage of what we bring in. And some of that's to do with the pandemic because we just didn't have technicians. And some of it is to do with, like, I think corporations run lean. So if you look at a private practice hospital, the surgeons are the ones who are probably generating the most income, but they're probably the ones that are also taking up the most staff. If you look at the percentage of staff, they take the most because they need the most anesthesia support. You need someone to scrub in often. Like there's just a lot more support needed compared to some of the other specialists, but then what they bring in is more. So I think the way that we look at that is sometimes skewed because the surgeons, like, they make all the money. I'm like, but they're ticking up all the staff too. But if you're in a situation, which I have been, where I've been like relatively short on staff, that can be frustrating. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. I will say, like, we chatted before. I'm a little bit happier right now. So I'm like trying to think of things that were making me unhappy when I was talking.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to. Oh, I was talking about overcoming challenges. And first of all, the whole 5-year thing, that is, I find that it's a lot more common now. So, I mean, if somebody thought that was bad, then they better not look at my CV. Because the last job, I don't think you always stayed 2 years. So hopefully that mindset is.
Well, that's because you're a millennial. That's because you're a millennial. I'm judged by, the Gen Xers. Like, I was in Florida for 5 years, and like I come back here and everyone's like, oh, it doesn't even seem like that. It seems really fast. I'm like, maybe it seems fast to you because it's not your life. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you weren't living in Florida for 5 years. That's your perception of not your life, so I find it interesting. But yeah, you're right. Millennials don't. That's why I love millennials. Millennials don't do that. They have more the portfolio career. I think it's much more common for millennials to be totally comfortable with that. And I think I'm not. I think it's great, but I am trying to learn to be like, okay, I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And like, even just the judgment of I'm part-time, I work 24 hours a week. I honestly feel like that's enough. That's enough surgical oncology for me. I love it. I don't want to do more. Because when I worked full-time as a surgical oncologist, I didn't really do anything else. It's exhausting. I love it. It's exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting. It's physically, like, standing in surgery. I know I sound like I'm complaining, but I just am like, I don't want that to be the only thing I do. I just don't. And as much as I love it. So yeah, and I think the millennials would, you're right. The millennials would be like, 5 years, that's great.
I know. It's like, man, that's forever.
I'm secretly a millennial. In my heart, I'm a millennial. Yes, even though I'm Gen X. I have some very strong Gen X tendencies also, but yeah, I love the millennial attitude.
Yes. And again, part of the question too was overcoming those challenges and did the humor aspect, because I do know one of the topics you like to speak on when you do keynotes and things like that is actually bringing humor into the workplace and like how that can be done. And so I didn't know if you were able to use humor somehow. I mean, again, there's some times that your humor is not the place, but how were you able to kind of come to terms? Like, because like you said, you feel like you're being judged from a perspective that was, you need to stay in one place for 20 something years versus, moving more of on a 5-year schedule. And some of it is just life circumstances, right?
Yeah.
That, you need to move to a different place, not that you're unhappy or want to try something else. But I think some of this also sounds like understanding who you are and what you need and not worrying about what a group of people think. because that's not your life. Like you made that comment. It's like, this is, it's not your life. It's not your career. So how did you kind of come to terms of like, I'm Sarah and this is what makes me happy and what I can feel like I'm doing what I need to do in my career?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to lead anyone to think that I'm just awesome at overcoming every obstacle because of my wonderful sense of humor, because I don't think that's true. I think it's an evolving thing for me. Looking back, I wouldn't say, oh, I handled that perfectly, because there's always like any conflict, any situation. It's like, yes, I am a part of it, right? We have to take responsibility for things, but sometimes it's just, it doesn't work out. It's just a relationship that didn't work out. Like, you don't need to worry about it that much. You can just say, hey, this isn't working. I'm going to move on. Or just life is, I just like doing different things. I think now, like, I went to Humber College for 2 years. I took a course it's called Comedy Writing and Performance. It teaches you to look for funny things all the time. And I think now I think I'm better at it. Like now I definitely can instantly be like, yeah, that's actually funny. Something else I'm working on right now, you just made me think of this. Like I'm doing my first solo show, a Fringe solo show.
Oh.
And so there are elements of that are my journey of, it basically is a time frame of like finding the mass in my neck to moving back to Canada. So like going to Florida and my journey through that. And it's kind of more storytelling than stand-up, storytelling, acting, a little bit of stand-up. But there's some things in there that were not very fun that happened that I am trying to make funny, I guess, that I am seeing the humor. So some of it's the lens of looking back and going, well, that was kind of funny. Like one short example was when I was at University of Guelph, I did a surgery on a student's kitten. Like, why was this so controversial? I don't know. This kitten that ate a shoelace, and the students, like one of my favorite students, he's crying. He's going to put his kitten down. It's Friday night. I was like, okay, we're just going to fix your kitten. And I didn't actually think I did anything that wrong. I went to the surgery nurses and I was like, what's the least I can charge for this? And then I used, instead of all the fancy packs, I just used like, still sterile, but like a regular pack. And I just used regular drapes, and he had to take the kitten home in the morning. Like I just did it as cheap as I could do it. And I was called into the dean's office 3 weeks later. There was a big meeting about it. They were going to discipline me like for doing that. It was awful. But there's elements that are actually hilarious. Like at the time, this was a dean who did stuff like this, but at the time, the dean, how much trouble am I going to get in? I don't even care. Isn't that funny? Okay, so she emailed she was going to have the chair at the meeting. This is a meeting, like to me, this is so ridiculous. So then I wanted a faculty union representative there. Like these are all emails going back and forth. She's like, the chair's coming to this meeting. And I was like, okay. And then I was like, well, I better have a union. I'm a union person. Like I said, well, could I please request a faculty union representative as present? And then she wrote back, this was supposed to be a casual meeting. What? She's like, this is supposed to be a casual meeting, but because you've invited a faculty union representative, I have invited someone from the provost office. So now there's so many of us that we will not all fit in her office for a meeting about a kitten that did a shoelace. And then like I went to the meeting and I just got kind of railed on for like 40 minutes about how I'm not a team player. I didn't do anyone any favors. She's like, everyone would have been better off if you euthanize this kitten. And I was like, well, not the kitten.
It's definitely not the kitten.
Not me, because I would be the one. And yeah, anyway, the end result was like, I turned to her and I said, well, what would you have done if you were me? And she said, I would have euthanized the kitten. And like, I had been cool. I had been like, not crying, just like, I just kept saying the same thing. Like, I just kept saying, I made the best decision I could given the circumstances. Like, I just kept saying that. Like, I was like a lawyer. I was just like, I'm cool. I'm good. I'm going to get through this meeting and I'm not going to cry. And then for whatever reason, when she said that, I believed her. And I just like, it's not like, I'm just like bawling, Oprah crying. Like, I'm like, okay, I gotta go. And all these women were there. They're like trying to get Kleenex for me. They're like embarrassed. I should be embarrassed. I don't even care. Like, I look back at that. It was horrible. It was like a portion of why I decided to move to Florida. Like, there was a lot going on. I was getting recruited to Florida. Like, there was a lot going on, but I was kind of like, yeah, no, I don't, this is garbage, But now I look back at that meeting, I think it's really funny. That scene is hilarious, right? Like if you think about it, that's hilarious. We have like 5 perimenopausal women that are like high level academics having a meeting about a freaking kitten. It's funny.
Two things. I think it is good in one situation, good to think back and say, could there be anything different I do going forward, right? Learning from things. But at the same time, can it also be a time to know that things that feel like ultimate trauma, like I may not make the day alive, you can look back and see as humans. I think that's an important fact too, because I think most people, because a lot of veterinary people listening to this probably are like feeling the emotions you were at the time, because they can put themselves there and like feel how traumatic that would be. Knowing that these moments in life that are that traumatic in the moment, life goes on. And we can look back and say, wow, wasn't that just utterly ridiculous that even happened? Yeah.
Yes. And I think and the dean would wait, like, someone had to have told on me. I think I know who it was. It doesn't matter. They had to have told on me because it was like a Friday night. So like someone had to have like decided it was like it rose to the level of a dean, which that's not even my boss, right? Not a hospital director, not a chair, a dean. Like, so ridiculous. Like then that the dean would decide, yeah, that's worthy of my time to reprimand a surgeon. Like, and you know what you said, like, could I have done it differently? Maybe I should have called the hospital director to bother them about it. I don't know if they would have directed me differently because I'm the one who has to euthanize this kitten. And like, have I euthanized lots of animals for financial reasons? Of course. I've been a vet since 1996. Like, can't even remember how many times I've had to do that. There was a personal connection with the student. It's one of my students. It's an easy surgery. Like, I was just, I would do it tomorrow. I would do the exact same thing again. That's the thing. So did I learn anything? No, I learned that I would do that in that exact situation. I'd do it again. So, and there's just been like, I'm sure other veterinarians can relate to this. I don't know what it is. I would love to know if other veterinarians can relate to this because there's been lots of times where I'm like, not that I'm okay with it, but I'll do the euthanasia. I'll just be like, okay. And I'm not talking about, it's mostly old dogs with cancer that I euthanize now. So there's a whole different issue, but a financial, they can't afford it. It's really sad. We have to euthanize this pet. It's a terrible situation for veterinarians to be in. There's times when I can peacefully go, okay, this is what's happening, and I'm not okay with it, but I can do it. And then there's times where I don't know what it is. I'm just like, yeah, no, like it happened to me when I was an intern too. I just was supposed to euthanize this kitten with a PDA, and I just didn't. Like, I couldn't do. I don't know. I still remember the cat's name. Like, I was just like, no. I just didn't, and I just went to the next day and I was like, I can euthanize this kitten, and I don't know why. It has a PDA, like it's not like it's going to be fine if we don't do anything. And like, I think they let us do it as like a teaching case or something like that, but I didn't have the right to do that. It was a freaking intern, but I just was like, yeah, I don't know why. And I ended up with a dog that way. So yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes it's just whatever, you have a connection to the person or the animal, and like, you're just like, I can't do that. So
I'm sure many veterinarians, vet techs, everybody in this industry has had a moment where they took home just because they couldn't see it, be put down. So I think a lot of people can relate.
I had one that I talk about in my book that I was in primary care, and it was kind of the whole situation was weird. I was out at lunch, I came back, and they were like, oh, there's a euthanasia for you in the back. And I was like, well, what do you, like, I need to talk to people. I can't just it just can't be they were like, oh, she was crying. She just dropped the dog off. And anyway, it was a whole long story, but the whole thing was weird. And I tried to call her. I couldn't get a hold of her. And then I tried to call the vet in her town. She was from a small town. They're like, we don't have a record of that dog. And then I microchipped the dog. Anyway, long story short, it was her daughter's dog. And she was visiting her daughter who was married. They had a new baby. And the dog had one time growled at the baby or something, and they were going to rehome the dog. And then the mom said, I'll rehome the dog. I'll take it and get it a home, which I think is appropriate to rehome a dog who's growling at a baby. But then she literally drove from their house to our clinic to euthanize the dog, to rehome the dog. She was just going to this is how I'm dealing with this problem, right? Which is not what which is not what these clients wanted. Like once I figured out who they were. But anyway, I didn't know what to do at the time. I was a young veterinarian. I was pretty newly out. I just didn't euthanize the dog. I just left it. I was like, we're just boarding it because I don't think I thought about the microchip and everything. I think I was just so like, I just hitting pause. He's a nice dog. He's just going to be in a boarding for the night until I figure this out. And then I kind of was able to figure it out the next day. But other times, I don't know. Like I have euthanized a lot of pets because we all have, right? Sometimes your spidey senses or your heart or you just are like, yeah, no.
I think there are times when the split-second decision or the human heart component of things is so important. And this is why, you talked about really embracing new technology, and I'm right there with you. But the reason why I know that technology will never completely replace humans is that there is something about being a human where in an algorithm, it may not make sense. It isn't this is what was said, just go do it. You're not a machine, and that's a good thing. There are those times to ask yourself, does this make sense? Or do I need to sit in it for a second? And like that ended up being a completely right thing to do because you found out the original owners, like that's all they wanted. It was like an intermediary who decided like that this is the easiest way to handle it, which was not, in our opinion, appropriate. And so same thing I think in life too, is especially when it comes to your personal decisions, you're going to have to live with those decisions, whether it's like a career change or making an action that in the moment you have to know that you're going to have to live with that decision. So if luckily you can look back at those situations and say, I would have done that exactly the same way. That's really good. And if you can look back and see the humor side of it too. But I think those are all things very, really important. So I'm glad that you're able to do that. And then also make that in a fun way and share it with other people in a fun way. I want to ask you one question because the one thing that you do every episode on your podcast is you try to get people to encourage Ken Jeong to come on your podcast. And so this is how bad I am. I'm like, who is that? And so I had to Google him. And if you're like me, but I'll feel better. But as soon as you see him, you're like, oh, I know exactly who that is. So he is a big time actor and comedian. But I was wanting to ask you, is there something extra special about him other than he's extremely famous that you really like about his story? Because again, for those that you don't know, he was a human physician and then became who he is now, an actor and an amazing comedian. So what do you like about him so much that you are getting everybody to recruit and try to get him off?
Yeah. Matt Eisman is a physician and also a comedian. And he is one of the hosts of American Ninja Warriors, and also just like an incredible human being, I just have to say. And so I've recorded his episodes. He knows Ken Jeong. So we'll see. But it's not going that well. I don't know. There was interest, but Ken Jeong's publicist, I'll just say, wasn't super nice. So we'll see. But I've had a few people on my podcast like this. So Matt Eisman is one of them. Like people who just stopped, like people who went to medical school. Matt Eisman is a physician. So his story is very compelling to me because he just literally, and he didn't have success and then stopped. He was in a residency. His father was a very famous pulmonologist. And he just was like, I don't think I'm going to be happy doing this. And he literally just went to LA and has become like hugely successful. Now it's a beautiful story. He says he took his parents out for dinner. He was a first-year resident, I think. And he was like, I don't want to do this. And his father said, life is short. You need to be happy. And he's like, if I didn't have that support, I don't know if I would have done that. So, and I had another physician on who was the same thing. He just decided it wasn't for him and just like kind of cold turkey during a residency, which I just like, it blows my mind. So Ken Jeong is probably the most famous example where he just like was a physician for like 7 years, internal medicine specialist, but had this other side that he was like, people think that comedians just suddenly like hit the scene and they're famous. In my experience, like it takes a long time to get really good at stand-up comedy or comedy. And like those people have been working for years. Just you didn't know who they were because they weren't famous. And then something happened and they broke through. But there's years of work. So it's, but Ken Jeong was working and then he got a part in a movie. I think it was Knocked Up was like the first movie where he kind of broke out. Okay, this is what compelled. So it's partly that he's famous, but what compelled me about him is he was on late night. I'm just starting comedy. And like, again, I don't think this is me, but I was just really compelled because they were like, do you miss being a doctor? And he was like, hell no. Like, it was like looking at people's ingrown toenails or like athlete's foot or whatever he was doing. And he's like, I just made a movie. No, there's no part of me that wants that to go back to that. I just found that kind of blew my mind just hearing someone say that, because I think most of us would be like, of course I miss it. At least you say you miss it. And he was just like, no. So I think I'm very interested in that. I'm interested in people that can do both, like hard science career and then this very creative career. It's also just become a little bit of a like stupid thing I like to do at the end of my podcast because I think it's funny. I'll be honest, like whether I get him on or not, I'm just like lightly harassing Ken Jeong and I find it hilarious. It's not going that well getting him on, so I don't know if I ever will, but it doesn't even matter to me because I'm like, it's funny to me. Also, like one of my guests, Matt Shudo, I'll shout out again, he wrote a song for Ken. And then I've had another guest, Greg Bishop, he's a cartoonist, so he made a cartoon for Ken. So like, I love how it's just, and then I'm getting like messages on LinkedIn like, I know his friend and I'm gonna like, which is like amazing. Again, all these things are hilarious and wonderful and amazing to me. So yeah, that's why I keep doing it. I am intrigued by people who just did veterinary medicine and then did all the work. And like people would say they threw it away. I'd never believe that. But then just had that courage or conviction to just be like, because I don't have it. It's not like people are like, are you retiring from veterinary medicine? I'm like, A, I don't want to. And B, I couldn't do it. So I'm fascinated by people who have done that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do love how it's like brought this community together of all people who are trying to help you do this thing.
Amazing.
Which is a lot of fun. I do understand what you're saying and this is part of the podcast too, right? It's understanding really the strength in being able to really understand what you want, you as an individual, nothing else. Like really know what you want and leaning into it. And Ken, there was like a 7-minute clip with him on The View that launched just this month. And apparently they were the ones who announced him funniest doctor like back in 2001. And so I think his mother blamed them or something. But anyway, he did a recent sit down with them and he talked about really loving comedy and acting from college. And they're like, so why did you go into medical school? And he's like, because that was my path. Like, yeah. That's just the path I was on. And of course, he joked and said, because I'm Asian. So he was able to realize that had been a kind of just an assigned path. It wasn't really what he wanted. So he was able to assess that and then change. And of course, now we know how successful he is and happy. Like you said, he's like, no, I don't miss it. It's like, I just made this movie and he was on there promoting like 10 different things he's doing right now. And I think that's a good thing to admire is someone who can, despite people putting you on a path, really be able to understand what your values are and what you're excited to do and really lean into it and work hard at it and then see them be successful at it. So I completely understand that one.
Yeah, that's what I'm fascinated by. And also like it makes me, I have to think about myself and like, what would I have done? And I still think I always would have done what I'm doing. I just maybe would have been nice to bring some comedy in a little sooner. But I'm really happy, like where I am right now, working 24 hours as a surgeon and the rest of the time devoting to creative stuff and comedy and like trying to mix it in with doing comedy for veterinarians. So I'm still figuring it all out. I would not think to say I have it figured out, but I'm working on that. So yeah, stay tuned.
That's just life. It's just understanding what is the right balance of everything to make us who we are. 24 hours a week being the surgeon, and that fills your cup. And then the rest of what you do fills the rest of the cup. That's so important to, I think, listen and understand, because that's the only way I think you are going to really feel like you can be yourself and you're doing what you need to do.
Yeah, you don't always end up doing what you thought you were going to do.
And that can be kind of the fun part too. So
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us and staying a little bit longer. I've had a really good time talking with you and love your podcast. I am a follower and a listener. So yes, definitely hope that keeps going and we'll continue to root on for Ken to join.
Okay.
And
awesome.
And I kind of disqualified myself because I said I had to Google who he was, but that means, Ken, you need to broaden your audience. So
obviously, his publicist is not doing a good job.
No.